I'm going to show you a step-by-step process for writing fantasy music. I wrote an original fantasy piece just for this video, which we'll use to learn how this turns into this. Special thanks to East West, who are kindly sponsoring this video. More about them later. The first thing we need to do is figure out what we're even gonna write. Fantasy is a pretty broad term that can mean a lot of different things, so we're going to narrow it down to something more specific. For many people, the first step is to start banging on the keyboard until something interesting comes out. But I find that if I set a destination right at the beginning, then it guides all of my decisions going forward and makes the whole process easier and smoother. And what else is composition but a long string of decisions? For this video, let's go with a Sleeping Beauty fairy tale type of fantasy, and we'll use this image of a castle as our guiding inspiration. Also, it's for a YouTube video, so I'll try to keep the piece under a minute long, which means that a single main theme with a repeat is probably gonna be plenty of material. Even just having those decisions locked down makes the project feel like it's no big deal.
Write a brand new piece of music
Is an overwhelming task that makes me want to go play Nintendo instead. But write an 8-bar melody inspired by this specific artwork feels pretty manageable, and so I'm much less likely to procrastinate. Let's move on to our main melody. Again, before writing a note, I can make some decisions, like what key the piece is in, the meter, the tempo, and so on. Because the castle has this hazy, sleepy feel, I think a 6/8 meter will be very peaceful and inviting. And after playing around with a metronome, 58 BPM feels like a pretty good tempo to fit what I'm going for. Too fast, and it might be adventurous or even threatening, but we're going for something a little more noble and restrained. I don't have a reason for any particular key, so I'll go with G minor. Sometimes you just need to pick something and move on. But in order to capture that magical, otherworldly sound, I'm actually gonna blend G minor and G Dorian. Check out my video on modes if you aren't familiar with Dorian, but it's like natural minor with a raised 6th degree, which gives us a kind of Celtic flavor, and the sound is often associated with fairy tales and magic. Next, I'll come up with a basic idea, which is the 2-bar phrase that will start my main theme. I already know that I'm in G Dorian, 6/8 meter, 58 BPM, a little sleepy and restrained. So with all that in mind, I played around on the keyboard for a while until I came up with this simple phrase. I'll follow the sentence form structure, which is my favorite formula for writing a melody, which means that all I need to do next is repeat my basic idea. The formulas are great for keeping you moving along, but of course they're not meant to be strict and binding. So here, I feel like we're a little too stuck on the pitch D, and I want to make sure the theme expands into bar 5. So I'll use that repetition of the basic idea as the material to work with, but I can tweak it a bit so we get a variation that moves things forward. I think that's easy enough to do just by reaching to a higher point, and settling the phrase on the A tells us that the theme's not over yet and there is more to come. Next, we move into the continuation section, where the theme hits a climax and drives everything forward towards the cadence. And the end is one of those things that you really don't need to overthink. Decide if you want it to feel resolved or unresolved, and then land in a place that feels that way. Since I already decided the theme was going to repeat, I know that we're not at the very end yet, so we'll go with unresolved. Remember how I said making those early decisions would make everything else easier. We already heard the A, or 2nd scale degree in G minor, feels unresolved, so let's go with that one again. And that's our theme done. Let's move on to harmony. While I do that, I want to tell you about the Hollywood Fantasy Orchestra from East West, this video's sponsor. The Hollywood Fantasy Orchestra is East West's latest release that bridges the gap between orchestral and world instruments. It's an entirely new orchestra that puts all the period instruments you need on the same stage. And the specific instruments it comes with make it perfect for your next big fantasy epic or medieval tale. Instruments like lute, viola da gamba, Wagner tubas, alpenhorns, and more. The Fantasy Orchestra is included with Composer Cloud Plus, which is a subscription service that gives you access to over 60 collections and 42,000 instruments. I really do recommend Composer Cloud to composers who are ready to move beyond the stock sounds from MuseScore or their DAW, but that aren't quite ready to start dropping thousands of dollars on sample libraries. At $19.99 a month, it really is a great next step for composers ready to start taking their production seriously. When I have a melody first and then I'm adding chords to it, there are several things I keep in mind. How does the chord sound with the melody note? For example, this B flat here. If we keep ourselves within the constraints of G Dorian, the B flat could be the third of a G minor chord, or the seventh of a C7 chord. How does the chord fit in the context of what's on either side of it? Is it interesting, surprising in a good or bad way? Does the bass line make for good counterpoint? How does the chord fit in the overall context? Since we're in G minor, I probably want to start with a G minor chord. The end of the first A theme is supposed to feel unresolved, so it makes sense to go with the 5 chord. So with all of that in mind, here's how I chose to harmonize the first A theme. Now, because the theme just repeats pretty much exactly the same, I want to do something to change it up. So maybe this time, instead of G Dorian, I'll blend G major and G natural minor together to help create that fantastical, otherworldly sound. Also, I'm trying to keep in mind that I want a fantasy sound. So one thing I could do is actually use parallel fifths on purpose. Parallel fifths have an ancient quality to them, so I think it could help us capture that world. So here on the F, G, D in the melody, we could go with B flat, C minor, G. Remember, I said that one of the things to think about when harmonizing is counterpoint. In the continuation part of the form, here we can spice things up a bit by adding a counterline in the bass. There's an opportunity to loosen up the form a bit too, with just some small tweaks, so we can make it feel a tad less predictable. So here in the cadence, I can extend it by a whole bar and hold out the tension on that A melody note just a little longer, which will make you yearn for that final resolution. And when we hit that final G, we can extend it again with a deceptive cadence, which is when you're expecting to cadence to a specific chord, but end up somewhere else instead. In the song A Dream is a Wish Your Heart Makes from Sleeping Beauty, the ending has a deceptive cadence on the flat 2 major 7 chord. It's one of my favorite things ever. It's one of the greatest examples I've ever heard of giving people what they expect, but not how they expect it. So we were totally prepared for that G to come, and we got it in the melody, but we were not prepared for it to be harmonized with an A flat major 7 chord, right in that perfect sweet spot of satisfying and surprising the listener at the exact same time. So since that's exactly the sound we're trying to recreate here, let's just do that too. Igor Stravinsky said, lesser artists borrow, great artists steal, so let's not make things harder on ourselves than they need to be. So with a slight tweak to the melody in the first bar, here's the harmony for the second A theme. Next up is the accompaniment, or we could call it the orchestration sketch. This is a step before orchestration because I don't want to work out like specific trombone voicings when I haven't even decided how the piece is going to be expressed. So this is where I'll make broad instrument decisions, jot down ideas for textures or counter melodies, work out dynamics, those kinds of things. Again, I'll get more detailed in the next phase. For now, I'm just taking one step forward into conceptualizing the music. For the first A theme, I'll go with recorder to immediately give us that Renaissance fair vibe. And then to keep the interest, when we get to the lift in the line, I'll add a harmonized line underneath, mostly thirds and sixths. The texture will be pretty simple. I'm thinking sustained strings and voices with some strummed harp chords. So for the sketch, I might just put in those harp chords and make a note in text, strings and choir. For the next section, I want to change things up. So the first way is by completely changing to a new instrument. We had a woody recorder sound for the first A theme, so I'm thinking as our piece moves to G major and becomes more noble, we should go with a brass sound. I'm going to bring the melody down an octave here so it's in a nice, comfortable range for the French horns. But changing the register of the melody is actually a really good way to change things up too, make the music feel like it's going somewhere. I'm going to want some movement and motion in this next section, so I'll sketch out for myself some ideas. For example, over the horns, we could have these soaring violin arpeggios. And then here I'll change to trumpets and have a rhythmic pattern in the chords. This is also a good time to work out general dynamics too. So we'll start fairly soft and then crescendo into the second section, which will be loud. Then to give some extra pop to that deceptive cadence, I'll do a sforzando. So the dynamics suddenly drop down from loud to quiet. And then I think we'll finish out quietly as well. And last but not least, that A flat major 7 feels like an easy opportunity for a ritardando to slow everything down into the final chord, so we'll throw that in too. Now that I have a plan, I feel ready to move into orchestration. And if you get nothing else from this video, I hope you appreciate that you can tackle a big project if you just take it one step at a time. So this is where I'm gonna take my arrangement ideas and actually flesh them out. I'll work out the specific chord voicings, decide which instruments are taking which roles, and start adding color and decoration. For example, to give a stronger sense of magic to the first section, I'm gonna add this little celesta figure. And for more of that Renaissance coloring, I'll have arpeggios on the lute. The process is pretty much the same for the next section. The biggest difference is that I've started bringing in percussion elements because this whole part is grander, needs to have more punch. And it's at this point that I'm able to hear gaps. So here I notice there are some gaps when the horns rest, so I added these trumpet figures to keep the top line constantly moving and interesting. You don't always have to bombard people with information. There are times when it's nice to be spacious and times when it's nice to keep things moving. For the first half, as we were establishing the mood, I felt like it was nice to be more open. But here, since we're in the second half of the piece and I want to keep the energy up, this is one of those times that I'll keep a constant flow of something to keep our attention. With all that done, I'm ready to move into the production phase. For me, that usually starts with exporting the MIDI out of Dorico and into Logic. So the next thing I'll usually do after my tracks are imported is to get a good performance for the parts I've already written. After everything starts coming together, I'll look for opportunities to add more color and interest. Creativity is a messy thing, so just because I finished the orchestration phase doesn't mean I can't add more. The point of the steps is to give a framework and help move things along, not to force ourselves to follow some imaginary set of restrictions. For example, I'll use the dulcimer from the Fantasy Orchestra to add some fills and double the main melody. I'll also use some of the percussion instruments, like the bodhrán and the song to add color and groove. This is also where I'm mixing, setting levels, EQs, reverbs, and all that. I don't usually do a separate mixing phase. I just tweak all those different things as I'm going along and working. All right, we started with a general idea, used that to write a melody, added chords, planned the arrangement, orchestrated, and produced the final piece. Here's how it turned out. Sometimes writing orchestral music can feel like a big, overwhelming thing. And that's why breaking the process down into steps can actually be very motivating. If you find a step-by-step process like this helpful, then you really don't want to miss this video here, because Elaine Mayran from Score Club and I show you exactly how to take a simple melody and expand it into a full and lush orchestration. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.